Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 21 and it's going to cover a session from a casino that I'm sure all of you have heard of this time. Commerce Casino in Los Angeles, probably one of the most popular poker rooms in the country, if not the world. It's also, I think, the biggest. So without any further ado, let me jump into some of the pros and cons and what you guys should expect if you choose to play a session here. So one of the better things about Commerce is that a lot of people's first time happens here. If you're someone who's getting into poker in the Los Angeles area, chances are your first live session is going to happen at Commerce just because it's such a popular room. And as a result, there's a lot of weak players and the games are generally soft. Another point that's related to this room's popularity is just the amount of games that are available. From the common games like No Limit all the way to mixed games, there's a lot of options, and if you're someone who likes to mix it up, this is a place you guys should check out. And lastly, the wait times for games here are generally very short, also just because of how many games they have, and that's something I personally enjoy. Let's move on to some of the bad things about this place, and unfortunately, I have quite a lot to say. Keep in mind this is all opinion based, but it's my experience and hopefully you guys get something out of that. Number one is gonna be, this property is just pretty run down and it's honestly just not that nice. Another thing which is probably obvious to all of you LA locals is the amount of traffic you have to deal with going to and coming from this place. It's based on the 5 freeway and the 710, if you guys know where that is, and there's just a bunch of traffic, especially during the week. It's just kind of a nightmare. Something else that isn't great is just how close everything is together. Going to and from your table, you're probably knocking into a few people along the way. And lastly, but not least, this is by far the worst thing for me, is just how shallow the buy-in structures are. It kind of takes all the creative element out of the game. When you're buying in for like 30 or 40 big blinds fixed and everyone around you is a short stack as well, it completely changes the way poker is played, and that is by far my biggest concern with this location. Alright, so when it's all said and done, it's kind of obvious, I'm sure, but I'm not a huge fan of this place, and I'd give it a personal rating of 2 out of 10. I know there's a ton of die-hard Commerce fans out there, so just remember it's my opinion, but personally, not really a fan. Anyway, moving on to poker. I wasn't even sure what game to play here because I normally play a $3 big blind game, but the buy-in for that was $100 for 1-3, so that's 33 big blinds. Not sure if that's something I want to jump into. The next game up was 3-5 no limit with a $200 buy-in, and then the next one up from that was 5-5, but the board was pretty long for that, so I ended up going with 3-5 no limit in for 200. Let's see if we can maneuver these 40 big blinds and make something happen. So for the first few orbits, I was pretty card dead, but one thing I did notice is that one player in particular had a pretty big stack, and in about 4 hands, he got all the way down to around $80. So he was pretty frustrated, obviously, and this next hand, he opens to 30 when everyone folds to him. It's a pretty big open, especially from an unopened button, 6x, but when the action gets to me in the small blind and I look down at pocket 10s, being that this player was honestly pretty frazzled at the recent developments, I decided that a 3-bet was the best option. I also noticed the big blind on my left assembling a $30 bet to call with, so I don't really want to take pocket 10s 3 ways out of position. I'd rather just force the big blind out and get all the money in versus this button's particularly wide range in this scenario. So I decided to 3-bet to $100. The big blind looks a little annoyed but folds his cards, and the button, as expected, shoves for his remaining $50. I turn over the pocket 10s, and the button shows king queen, so we're off to the races here. The board comes ace high, which obviously if he hadn't shown his cards would be a little scary, but we're still in good shape. The turn is also a blank, but unfortunately the river is a queen, so we lose this flip. Not off to a great start. Every time I lost a hand that was like even a decent size, I had to reload just because stacks are that shallow. So top off with another $100, move on to the next hand, see if we could pick it up from here.
Oh yeah, 5
In this next hand, there's an early position open to $15, and the player on my right 3-bets to $30. I'm not sure what to make of this min raise. Sometimes minimum raises are a sign of weakness, but other times they're really strong holdings that they don't want their opponents to fold to. So I'm not sure what to make of it, but I looked down at pocket jacks next to act and decided to just call. I think a 4-bet could definitely be okay, but in this particular situation, being that the player on my right seemed like a fairly straightforward guy, I decided to just flat and hopefully play in position. It folds back to the early position player, and he puts in the extra $15. So we are going 3 ways in position to a flop of 10-7-3 with 2 clubs. The first player checks it over to the middle position guy on my right, and he puts out a continuation bet of $30 once again. I'm not too sure, again, what he's representing here. I think he'd go a little bigger with a strong hand, but being that there's a player behind to act, and I think a raise here would kind of be an overplay, I decided to just call and see what develops. The early position player calls as well, so we're still 3 ways to a turn, which is an interesting card in the king of clubs. The first player checks it over to the player on my right, and this time he slows down and checks. The action's on me, and although I think we could have the best hand sometimes, I'm not sure if a bet here makes a lot of sense. We're probably getting called by better and folding out worse. So in this particular turn, I decided to just check and evaluate rivers. So still 3 ways to a river here, which is the jack of spades. So we river a set on a pretty strange board. The early position player this time puts out a bet of $70, and the player on my right pretty quickly lets it go. Action's back on us, and I think it's an interesting spot, although I don't know if there's any other logical play besides just calling. A raise feels like suicide, and a fold just seems way too tight. So not particularly in love with the situation, but I put in the call, and unfortunately we get shown queen jack of clubs. So pretty nasty run out there, and I think we're just destined to lose whatever river bet he put in there. Not running great so far. Let's see if things can turn around. On to the next hand. In the next hand, a late position player puts in an open of $15. The small blind calls, and I look down at 10-6 of clubs from the big blind. I decided to defend, so we're 3 ways to a flop, which comes 7-5-3 with 2 clubs. The small blind leads out on this flop for $15. We have a straight draw and a flush draw, so we make the call, and the late position player comes along as well. So still 3 ways to a turn, which is the 9 of spades. This time the small blind slows down and checks, and when the action's on us, we have a ton of equity. We actually picked up more outs on the turn, and we have pretty much no showdown values. So when I have a hand that can make a lot of hands, but doesn't really do well going to showdown as it stands, I think the best play is to bet. So that's what I decide to do, hopefully take it down right here. So I put in a bet of $70. And the late position player goes in the tank for quite a while and eventually decides to go all in for a total of $110. The small blind folds right away. For such a cheap price, we obviously can't fold, so hopefully we get lucky on the river with one of our many outs. I put in the call, so heads up to a river, which comes the ace of spades. A total brick, so we're left here with 10 high. I just throw it in the muck, but he shows 7-6 off suit. All right, we haven't won a hand yet. Let's see if we can turn it around.
Come on, do it.
Okay, so in this next hand, the action folds to us, and I look down at king jack offsuit in late position. I put in an open to $20, folds all the way to the big blind, who decides to make the call, so heads up to a flop, which comes king 5-3 rainbow. Surprisingly, he leads right out for $20, but something you guys should know is this guy had been doing that pretty much every single time when he defended for the blinds. I don't think I'd seen him check it over to the aggressor once. His pretty much standard play was to just lead out and see what happens. So I hadn't seen it get to showdown yet. Not sure what it means, but with our hand having top pair and decent kicker, pretty obvious call, I think. Raising doesn't really accomplish much, and folding seems way out of the question. So put in the call and see what happens on the turn, which is the ace of spades. We no longer have top pair, but I don't see how many aces he can have here, aside from maybe just taking a stab with like ace 5 or ace 3 on the flop. Regardless, he checks it over to us, so I'm pretty confident we have the best hand at this point. Being that there's some straight draws, worse kings, and flush draws available to get value from, I decided to put in a bet of $35, and he pretty quickly check raises all in for $130. That was unexpected, but breaking down what possible hands he could have here, aside from sets, I'm not really sure what he's representing. He could have flush draws, but without getting too nerdy on you guys, because the ace and king of spades are out there, there's a lot less Broadway combinations of flush draws he could have, as opposed to if the spades were the 5 and the 3. So I'm bearing that in mind. Although we do block some flush draws with the jack of spades, not really a card we want to have if we're putting our opponent on a flush draw, I think our hand is just way too strong at this point, and if he has an ace that he somehow stabbed the flop with, I think we're just going to have to pay him off. I put in the call, the river comes a brick, I wait for him to show, and he kind of just shakes his head, doesn't look too excited about it, so I just show my hand right away. No need to make him show at this point, and he throws it in the mug. So kind of a weird hand, but happy to finally take one down and move on to the next hand with actually more chips than we started with. A few hands later, I look down at ace-queen offsuit from early position and decide to open to $25. It folds all the way around to the small blind, who was the same player from the previous hand. He had rebought, and at this point he was down to, I think, $110 or so. And he looks down at his cards and slides the entire stack in there. Folds back to us, and against some players, I think you could contemplate a fold with ace-queen, but against this guy, definitely not. Put in the call, and we get some bad news in pocket kings. So we're looking for some help here on the flop, and sure enough, it comes ace-7-4 with 2 spades. The turn is the ace of spades, giving our opponent a flush draw, so I'm just hoping for a red card on the river, and thankfully, it's red. The king of hearts. Careful what you wish for. I guess I should have been a little more specific in my head, but anyway, on to the next hand. This close to another jackpot, by the way.
Oh my god.
You needed it. We get an ace.
A few hands later, I look down at king 10 of clubs from late position, put in an open of $15, and the player on my left, who's pretty solid, hadn't seen him play many hands, makes a 3-bet to $40. It folds back to me. With a hand this pretty against a pretty face-up range, I think it's okay to make the call and navigate some streets. We were both, I guess, probably not that deep, but by commerce standards, have a decent amount of chips, so I think it's fine. I make the call, and we go heads up to a flop of jack 9-8 with 2 diamonds. So we flop an open-ender and I guess 1 overcard, although I'm not sure if a king would be good for us. Anyway, I check it over to him, and he thinks for a little bit and checks back. The turn is the deuce of diamonds, bringing in the front door flush, although I expect my opponent to bet his flush draws a lot on the flop, so don't think he has a lot of flushes here, and this board looks like it's much better for my range than his 3-betting range. I decided to apply some pressure with our open-ender and pretty minimal showdown value at this point, so I put in a bet to $50. I don't expect him to fold over pairs to just 1 bet, but I'm expecting this to work a good amount of the time if I apply some more pressure on the river. So sure enough, he thinks for a second and puts in the call. At this point, I think he has around $180 behind, maybe a little less. So I'm bearing that in mind as we go to a river, which is an offsuit 3. Doesn't really change anything, and at this point, I think my opponent has a 1-pair type of hand, and I decide to go for it. It's going to be hard to call with just 1 pair on such a wet board. I could have a lot of sets, maybe even straights and flushes, 2 pairs, all of the above, and he can't really have a lot of those strong hands aside from maybe a set of jacks that's trapping. But everything else I think is going to have a pretty hard time calling, and we could also just get like ace-king and ace-queen to fold. So I take a little bit of time and decide to apply max pressure and go all in. He doesn't think for any time at all and calls right away. I just let him know he's good right away, and he shows pocket aces, so we're obviously not winning this hand. I thought there was a good chance it would work. There's a ton of stuff on this board that beats a single over pair, but it is low stakes and people hate folding big hands, especially when they're so rarely dealt to them. So sorry for trying, thought it might work. On to the next hand. So literally the next hand, as I'm pulling out some cash to reload some chips, I look down at Jack 9 offsuit and face 5 limpers ahead of me. Being that we're in late position, I decided to toss in the $5 and see what happened. The small blind completes and the big blind checks. So we're going multi-way to a flop, which comes 10, 8, 7 with 2 diamonds. So right away we flop the nuts. And at this point, we're actually playing the hand with effective $140 since I haven't even had time to put some cash on the table yet. It's going to be an interesting one for sure, especially when the small blind leads out for $20 and there's 2 callers before the action gets back to us. So definitely want to put in a raise here. Although one thing I noticed is that the small blind has $41 after the $20 bet. So I think a pretty cool idea in this exact spot would be to min raise to 40 and reopen the action to him so he could shove his entire stack, and then everyone else could call those extra 41 or 42 bucks, and then the action would be reopened when it gets back to me. So that's what I decided to do, make it $40, crossing my fingers that the small blind shoves his entire stack, but he doesn't. He calls, so $40 of his beginning stack is in there, and he left himself with $21 behind. I don't even know what to say about that, but obviously everyone else calls, and now we're all still gonna see the turn, which thought it was a cool idea, I guess not. This time on the Queen of Clubs turn, the small blind decides to put the rest of his money in, $21. Both of the players in between call, and when the action gets back to me, I'm finally able to go all in, so that's what I decided to do. Total amount I think was 130-ish, not sure the exact amount, but the player first to act in the side pot now folds, and the other player calls. I show my cards, the small blind sees the straight and just throws his in the muck right away, and the last player shows pocket 7s, so we're in pretty good shape until the river is a queen, pairing the board, and obviously we now lose to a full house. So pretty unfortunate run out, and at this point I got a little frustrated and decided to just call it a day and live to see another session. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed those hands. I got into the game for $700 and cashed out for that much. I don't know if you guys can see. It's a big fat 0, so biggest loss on the vlog so far, I believe. Things have been better. Let's just put it that way. Obviously, winning and losing are both part of the game, so hopefully things just turn around soon and we could get back to some winning sessions. So before I wrap this video up, I wanted to share some quick announcements. Number 1 is gonna be that I'll be in Vegas July 9th through July 12th, just grinding some cash games. If you guys are curious as to where I'll be playing, you wanna meet up, grab a beer, say hi, play some cards, whatever the case is, I'm gonna be sharing the poker rooms I'm at on my Instagram. So go ahead and add me, the link is in the description. Again, for whatever reason, just reach out to me if you guys want to meet up, and I'll be happy to meet you face to face instead of through this camera. Secondly, I started a Patreon. If anyone out there is feeling generous and wants to throw in a big blind a month or whatever the case is, I'm kind of battling going up in stakes in poker and also paying off college debt. So totally unnecessary, but if anyone out there wants to do it, it would be very highly appreciated. And lastly, I'm gonna be doing a Q&A type of thing coming up, either in the next vlog or the one after that. So if any of you guys out there have some questions, I've been getting a lot of them, and I figured the video format would be the best way to answer them all at once. So yeah, either related to poker or not related to poker at all, I'll be happy to answer you guys' questions. Oh, and one more thing, I'll be doing a little bit more traveling this summer, so if any of you guys want a vlog from a particular poker room in California that I haven't done, shoot me a message, leave a recommendation, and I'll be happy to check some out. For those of you guys who know a bunch of rooms, think some might be cool for a vlog episode, let me know. Alright, so that wraps up this video. If you guys enjoyed, please give it a like. And as always, I appreciate all you guys watching and all the support. So I'll see you guys next time. Good luck at the tables. Peace.